Advisory Council meeting for Building Bright Futures. I want to, say thank you all because I recognize that we have held quite a few SAC meetings in the last couple of months, but I hope that you have all found it incredibly valuable, whether it be State Advisory Council business or really diving into the needs of our communities. So, recognizing that we are now all on month 3 of pandemic life, I can't believe I'm saying that. Our team debriefed a little bit this morning, but that we are all in month 3. And we took a little bit of time to reflect on, how we were all doing as a team and where we've come from and how our minds have shifted and how our organization has shifted in this past month. And we recognize that it's been a lot. There has been so much that has taken place in this period. Not the least of which includes 2 major public health crises, right? So COVID-19 and then this broader, long-standing systemic racial injustice. So before we dive into how we as a State Advisory Council and early childhood partners can do our best to support children and families during this unprecedented time, we do want to take a moment of silence. So if everybody who is on video can quickly stop their video and mute their microphone, we're going to take 1 minute of silence. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to bring folks back into the virtual room. Looks like we have about 28 folks currently participating in the meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to Chloe, who is one of our State Advisory Council board co-chairs, to go through a couple of agenda items on the council business.
Great. Thanks, Morgan. Nice to see everybody today. I hope everybody's staying cool. We are going to just do a quick roll call. I will call out your name if you're an SAC member, and you can either wave or unmute and say hi or respond in the chat box. That would be great. And then if you are not a State Advisory member, but you're participating, if you could introduce yourself in the chat box, that would be great as well. I'm just going to go right through the list on paper instead of trying to manage my Brady Bunch squares. So Cheryl, designated members first, Cheryl Wilcox. See Cheryl. Renee Kelly. Do I see Renee? There you are. Steve Berbecco.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Steve. Auburn Watersong. Actually, no, he's not able to be here. Ken Jones. And Kate Rogers.
Hi, everyone. It's Kate.
Hi, Kate. And Brina Holmes. We have Brina. And then
Janet Kilburn for Brina here. Sorry, couldn't unmute.
Great, thanks, Janet. And then Representative Brumsted, you are here.
Hi.
Nice to see you. And then at large, that was appointed members, at large members. So Kim Kaiser, are you here? I thought I saw you. Allie Richards. Julie Cadwallader-Staub.
I'm here. Hello.
Nicole Grenier.
Hi, everyone. I'm here.
Hi, Nicole. Emily Merrill.
Yes, hi.
Oh, there you are. And Amy Johnson.
Hi.
Hi, Amy. Christy Swenson. Can you see Christy? No. And then Flora Diaz-Smith.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Flora. And then our 3 vacancies. So nice to see everybody. I think we probably have a quorum or whatever we need to have an official meeting. So thank you. And one more item of business for us is the May minutes, approving the May minutes. So hopefully everybody got a chance to look at those. And I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
I'm happy to make a motion.
Thank you, Cheryl. And a second to the motion to approve the minutes.
Happy to second. It's Julie.
Thanks, Julie. All in favor, please say aye or raise your hand or something. I don't know.
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed? And any abstentions? All right, I'm going to take it that the ayes have it. So May minutes are approved. And then we are going to move on to our final budget discussion before approving. Hand back to Morgan.
Okay, so we do have a few more State Advisory Council members that were not able to be on last month's call where we did a review of the 2021 budget. So I want to take just a couple of minutes to provide a very high level overview on strategy. So for those of you who received the budget, I will allow an opportunity for some questions later on. But I think what's important to note for this year's budget is that we really worked hard to diversify our funding in this period. So if you can remember last year's budget, a significant portion of that budget was based on federal funding. And so we've moved away from that model, both because we didn't receive a very large and significant portion of our budget, but really in effort to shift and diversify our funding and focus on some key Building Bright Futures projects. So yes, we are focused on alignment and continuity of services across the early childhood sector, but one of the things that we've really worked on in this last period and would like to carry forward is engagement, and not just across our sector of services, but also really figuring out how we better engage families and provide an opportunity for family leadership. We will definitely continue our priority areas in terms of children's mental health, as well as early childhood workforce. And then our key programs of Building Bright Futures. So one of which is obviously the State Advisory Council, but if you think about the layers of our infrastructure, we also have such a robust network of regional councils, early childhood action plan committees, as well as early childhood and data policy work. So all of those things were prioritized in this current budget draft. Next slide, please. So to give you a sense of the current budgeting numbers, I do have a bit of an update, but based on the revenues that we project for the 2021 budget, we're talking about a $1.1 million budget. And what you're seeing in this breakdown is governmental committed, so around $584,000 is committed, which is about 50% of our budget. And when we look at the foundations and sponsorships, we have $235,000 that is either committed or expected. And that projection was based on funding that we had previously received, where we were planning on either extending or going into an implementation year of that grant, or based on existing conversations with partners. And I do have an update there to say that we've actually secured an additional $100,000, not in addition to what's there, but since the last budget period that we discussed, we did receive a $100,000 grant to support the continuation of Building Bright Futures collective impact work in the area of substance abuse in Chittenden and Grand Isle. So that was really exciting, and that was a part of what we had projected as committed, so a committed or expected. So that is a really exciting update there. We do still have $250,000 planned for foundations. So there are a range of partnerships that we've been developing in collaboration with some of our other private philanthropic partners to really move the foundation's work forward. So by January 1, we are still in a position to raise $250,000. Which we are confident in our ability to do thanks to our partnerships. And sponsorship prior to this meeting was around $10,000 needed to be raised, and we have secured $5,000 of that already. So again, really moving forward in our revenues. In terms of expenses, in our personnel line, that is obviously the bulk of our costs associated with our expenses. And I will say we don't have any major transitions in personnel outside of the transition of a 0.5, so a part-time research and policy analyst position, transitioning to a research and policy director. And as I mentioned on last month's call, we are in a really phenomenal position to be leaning into our data and policy work at BBF and building our capacity there. So we've just recognized this as a key need moving forward. And then just to note that we will be maintaining at least 50% of a coordinator within each region. And that does not drastically shift the current coordinator model that we have right now, but that is the plan moving forward. So before we call a vote, I did want to open it back up to our board to ask whether or not anyone has any final comments or questions about this budget. And if you're raising your hand, I cannot see you because of the view. So please speak up. There we go.
Morgan, this is Julie. I had a question. First of all, of course, awesome job. It's fantastic to see this budget and what all is in the works and planned. I was wondering about the travel budget in particular and the hospitality. Just given COVID, it seems like your travel expenses would be really low looking forward, and same with hospitality. So neither of those are particularly big items, but given the 250 still to raise, I just wanted to ask about those two lines.
It's a great question, Julie. I'm glad that you brought it up. I actually would love to just quickly outline some of the things that we have been considering as we're thinking about approval of this budget. So during the COVID period and as we move forward, we've been thinking about how we can be more efficient in our work. And one of those efficiencies has been less travel and less funding going towards meals and, you know, all of the different kind of hospitality type things. One of the things that we did do during this COVID period to transition both of those line items, which really fall under our overhead for the most part, is we increased our capacity for Zoom. We made sure that each member of our team had their own individual Zoom link. We also expanded our ability to host the forums and webinars. It is nowhere near what we were spending on travel and those types of things, but it was a little bit of an increase in terms of transitioning everyone to remote status. So as we think about this coming year, one of the things that we've started to consider is in the context of raising that 250, if we were in a position where we were not able to raise that $250,000, what are the different line items that we would be considering simplifying and reducing? Some of those would absolutely be in the overhead bucket. So hospitality and travel are key, but also the office space that we currently have that is a shared office space. So even in the last couple of years, we've reduced efficiencies, but in thinking about how phenomenal our participation, engagement, and efficiency has been working as a team, where are the areas within this budget that we could reduce? So we absolutely have a kind of backup budget for both the event we don't raise that 250,000, but also what is our potential ability to expand certain priorities and initiatives if we were to raise additional funding? Thank you. Great question. Other questions from the board? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl to move into a vote.
Okay. So I'm looking for a motion with the following language. The Building Bright Future State Advisory Council moves to endorse the 2021 budget. So someone could make a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. Can I have a second?
A second.
Thank you. Anyone opposed? Anyone who would like to abstain? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And this is Julia. I'm taking notes for this meeting, and I saw, I believe, Floor was the person who moved, and I missed who was the second.
It's Jessica Brumstead.
Thank you, Jessica.
All right. I think I messed that up again, but I also think the ayes have it. At some point, I will get that down really well, even though like I've got detail in front of me. It's the only meeting that follows this procedure, but I will figure it out. So we're good. I think that the budget is an amazing piece of work given where we were 8 months ago even. So I think extremely well done.
Thank you all. And I should say, you know, this is such a collaborative effort. We have been working with so many folks and partners on the phone to really, you know, make sure that we have the right priorities, the right infrastructure, and are really moving in the right direction as a team, because this really is a collective effort. BBF is not just about BBF, the organization, but it really about holding the infrastructure for early childhood for the state of Vermont. So we really, really appreciate your partnership in both finalizing this budget, but also really helping support our vision moving forward. So as a part of that vision, one of the things that I just sent to you all about noon today was the Building Bright Futures Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Justice Statement. So internally as an organization, we've been doing so much work on our values and our priorities. So just as a reminder, we have a team of 13 that is really focused on our core values as a group. And, you know, over the last month, we've really, as a nation, but also as Vermonters, been confronted with the tragic reality of systemic racism and injustice. And so a part of our meeting on a regular basis internally is thinking about how we support the early childhood system of services. So internally, we built an equity team to move our work forward. And one of the things I wanted to share today with the State Advisory Council is that statement that we just sent out to folks. So if you did not receive this, please raise your hand or note in the chat. And I should also say, if any of the members of the State Advisory Council came on after we did roll call, can you please put your name and position into the chat, just so we make sure we're capturing your information as well. But I do just quickly want to read this statement. We will disseminate this much more widely, and then just have a quick discussion about what resonates with you on this statement. So in the blue box at the top of this document is the executive summary. It's really the position statement for Building Bright Futures. And this is not something that we're asking you as a board, as the State Advisory Council, necessarily to endorse and sign on to, but that we as an organization have developed. So racism is a public health crisis. As an organization, Building Bright Futures is committed to supporting the well-being and development of each and every young child and family in Vermont. As an early childhood community, we must collectively address systemic injustice and strive to do better for our youngest and most vulnerable children and families. We are committed to listening, learning, elevating inequities, and taking action to dismantle racism in our organization and in Vermont's early childhood system. Building Bright Futures is Vermont's foundational early childhood public-private partnership and neutral convener, mandated to serve as the State Advisory Council on Early Childhood. We are dedicated to improving the well-being of children and families statewide, and this includes building an equitable early childhood system. To do this, Building Bright Futures recognizes this change must start with us. It's our responsibility to personally and organizationally explore implicit bias, unconscious racism, and actions that contribute to racial inequities. The personal commitment of our team that we've made will better prepare us to be effective stewards to apply racial equity and economic justice lens to our policies and practices in order to collectively, as an early childhood system, make overdue changes for a stronger, more equitable Vermont. The threats of racism are not new. We recognize many of our existing systems are built on a history of oppression. However, we are now stepping up to answer the call to action. Our commitment to positive change will not just be in reaction to current events, but as a part of ongoing work in the early childhood system by integrating and weaving a focus of diversity, equity, social justice, and inclusion into our personal lives and all of our work. This focus includes, but is not limited to, Vermont's guiding principles, the Vermont Early Childhood Action Plan, internal staff trainings and professional development opportunities, fostering vulnerable and challenging conversations as Vermont's early childhood neutral convener, and supporting necessary change by elevating marginalized voices to inspire learning from those most impacted. We invite conversations to consider the impacts of inequity when reviewing our data, projects, programs, service delivery, and policy, and ensuring an integrated and aligned approach among our early childhood partners as we shape the health, development, and well-being of our youngest and most vulnerable children and families in Vermont. We look forward to your partnership. In solidarity, signed by me, the Executive Director at Building Bright Futures. And then this following page, and I know you all aren't seeing this in person, but I'd love for you to review this a bit later, is a document that was put out by BUILD, the BUILD initiative. Thank you, Beth, for sharing the screen. On racial equity in the early childhood system. And it shows 4 different levels of change. And that is what Building Bright Futures is using to guide our work internally in this area. And as we think about systems change for our teams. So I do want to pause and ask members of the board, what aspects of this statement that we just put out really resonates with you? And then what type of action we as a council and as individuals and organizations around this table can be thinking about taking in relation to diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice.
I would say, Morgan, I appreciate just the preface that this isn't new, that what happened obviously is awful, but that this isn't something new, that we're just realizing that racism is happening around the country, internationally, and here in Vermont, that this is embedded in our systems and our history is rooted in this, and that it's a big lift to be working on it. And I just really appreciate you prefacing your letter that way.
Thank you, Amy.
I agree with Amy. It's just that it brought tears to my eyes to read your statement, because it's just so. I think we as a board should endorse it to make it more powerful. I don't see a reason why not, but that's just my personal opinion. But it is really that it's personally and organizational also resonated with me. So it's not just this, and thank you.
Thank you, Flor.
I agree. Hi, everyone. It's Sally. Agree with what's been said. And also, I think we're all finding these channels of how best to be in this moment, as people and organizations. And then what are the things within that it means and what we should be doing. And one thing is being in solidarity. So a statement like this, absolutely important. Then I think going down the list, BBF to me has such a key role to play in what does it actually look like to build a system for those who need it in a way that they need it, and lifting up marginalized voices as you do it. And to me, BBF is the place to center that work for the community, so the early childhood community. And so I really do hope this is the beginning of something, and that we can look to the great, parent council that is starting to really run. Thanks, Emily and everyone who's doing, work on that, and really have that become sort of the hub, the energy behind a lot of this work that I think we really do need to double down on as an early childhood community. So I'm committed, certainly, Let's Grow Kids, to be a part of that, but I don't think it makes any sense for us, for example, to hold that. It's much, I would say, more sensible for BBF to really do that.
Awesome. Thanks, Allie.
Can I just jump in and dovetail on what Allie was saying? I think there's a lot of potential here. I second what everyone has said. I think there's a lot of potential to look at this work within the context of the Families and Communities Committee. And I know that before PDG ever came down the line, so it was like 2 years ago in the fall, that group of parent leaders, we identified what are the issues that are most relevant, what are the things that you want to work on that are impacting your families and your kiddos, and systemic racism was identified. And so we had some great connections with groups in Burlington schools looking at racial equity within schools. So that work started within that group 2 years ago, and I think there's more opportunity to continue building. And then thinking even further, not just building diversity within that committee, but also within our state advisory council. Like the one thing that I'm not sure I heard when trying to listen when you read the letter was around racial equity in terms of decision making, and the SAC being that body that makes recommendations to the legislature. I think it's an opportunity for us to not just build diversity within our communities or our committees, but then to make sure that the SAC itself is diverse and represents those vulnerable and marginalized populations. So.
So this is Jessica from the legislature, actually. And one of the things we're doing at the State House, or as legislators, is many of us are participating in trainings around racial equity and being asked to read a couple of books. One that I just finished is the Between the World and Me and White Fragility, and many of them that you hear about. And one of the things I've been thinking, and I didn't realize we were going to talk about this morning, or this afternoon, is that education in more of an orientation way is super important, because one of the things that White Fragility, the book White Fragility, really brings up is how much we don't think about, that we think we're being helpful, but we're really not. There's certain things that you do, that we just do, that we think is a great thing to do, but it's not always viewed that way. And sometimes even in educating children, it's the same sort of thing. You know, you think, well, this is the way I was brought up, and this is the way that how I'm educating my children. And then you become a child care provider, and it's important there too. And I know some of this in continuing education is more around what Let's Grow Kids tries to, as we increase the quality of our child care providers, it fits into that. But having programs that help our providers think about the issues of systemic racism is really important, because they may think that they've got it all under control and they know, but they may be really surprised. And so having some of that continuing education be around, I think, systemic racism and things you should think about is really important. I know that as a legislator, I've been really surprised. I grew up in Rhode Island where we were more diverse, but there's a lot of things that I've thought was helpful when in some ways it might have been hurtful. You know, you question yourself, should I have said it that way, or should I have done it this way? You know, those sort of things. And so I'm sure there are many of us that feel that way. So.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
I just wanted to jump in. I really appreciate the statement, Morgan, and everyone who worked on it, just as such a deep thinking reflection on how we can continue to move forward as a group. And I just also, I have been enjoying the work with families and with the Families and Communities Committee so much, in that it brings so many more voices to the table and perspectives. And I think that's something that BBF has always worked hard to do, is ask whose voice is not at the table. And so I look forward to continuing that work.
Thank you, Emily.
Can I just offer one more thing in response to Representative's comments? Just the Child Development Division, one of the things that we're looking at right now is setting up a community of practice for child care providers that is focused specifically on equity, social justice, implicit biases, and that sort of thing. So just to your point around how are we really supporting child care, not just child care, but educators in general and professionals in the field about how they approach this work is something that we're within the division working on. So just wanted to let you know that.
That's terrific. Thank you. I can pass that on to my colleagues as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Any other final reflections on this statement? This is not something that we will only talk about today. This is kind of just the first time that you as a group are hearing this statement, and we'd love to build that into our agendas as we move forward as a board, and offer a place, again, as we think about Building Bright Futures serving as this early childhood hub. How can we best serve our different partners and community members when we're thinking about different topic areas, primarily when we're thinking about equity and how we, not only as a board, but as a broader community, come together on these issues.
I would just like to echo what Flor said, that I know you don't need a vote and it's not, this is an operational thing, but I agree with Flor. If we're comfortable or some way for us to say yes, right on. So I would offer that.
And I agree with that. I think for the State Advisory Council to support the statement is an important statement in and of itself. And I wanted to just mention a couple things that resonated with me. One was that opening statement that other people have alluded to that talks about racism not being new, that the murder of George Floyd, because it was so well documented, suddenly has put racism right in the face of all of us, speaking for myself, white people. Whereas before it was so easy, even though these shootings kept happening, it was easier to ignore and go on with life in our usual white bubbles, again, speaking for myself. So I really appreciated that call out to increasing the visibility of racism. Also, this implicit bias, Renee, that you talked about, there is study after study of wonderful, good-hearted, well-intentioned childcare providers and primary level teachers whose implicit bias just comes out again and again, despite their best intentions. So professional learning around uncovering implicit bias and what to do about it, I just think is of crucial importance. And then the last thing I wanted to say is thank you for bringing up partnerships and the importance of partnerships. And it makes me wonder about Building Bright Futures and the Human Rights Commission, among many other organizations that BBF could partner with in a significant way around moving these issues forward.
Thank you, Julie. I agree. Anywhere where we can be doing a better job of partnership on a range of topics in the state, especially in the early childhood arena, is what we're moving towards. And I think both COVID and racial injustice are bringing folks together in ways that we haven't seen before. New partners are at the table, and it's really the right time for us to be leaning on the experts in the field and recognize when we aren't the experts. And I think this is definitely a place where BBF can be a resource to the community, but again, by bringing folks together to have the challenging conversations, not as saying we are the experts on this topic.
And this is Janet. Just a couple comments. I just want to build on everything everyone said. It's so wonderful. And thank you, BBF, for your leadership on this topic. And the graphic from Build, I thought was really informative. And then Susanna Davis was recently on the VCHIP champ call that they're doing every day with docs. And she shared a great document called Action Allyship Guide, which I'm happy to share. Morgan, you probably saw it, to share with everyone. But yeah, again, thank you for building on the work with the that's already been done with the guiding principles. And I look forward to contributing to elevating parent voices through the committee and through other state and national opportunities to really build up parent leadership capacity and bring forth everything we're trying to do, put it into action, and then the collaborations, the partnerships.
Thank you, Janet. Okay, Well, you know, it's interesting because again, in crafting this statement, we knew at BBF that this is something that we will be moving forward with regardless of a formal endorsement by the State Advisory Council. But in hearing many of you call for that language to be adopted, one of the things I'd like to do is open it now to ask whether the State Advisory Council will have a motion specific to this statement. So the language here would be that the State Advisory Council moves to endorse the BBF Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Justice Statement. Do we have a motion?
Sure.
Looks like lots of motions.
So because I couldn't hear everyone and I'm split screening right now in several different ways, I saw Floor. So Floor, I'm going to accept your motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
I can't see who it is. I'm so sorry.
Johnson.
Okay, and give me 1 second to pull my screen back up here. Okay, so I believe we need a second from a member of the State Advisory Council. So Linda, I really appreciate that endorsement of it, but we need an actual member of the State Advisory Council board to second the motion.
I'll second.
Yeah.
Okay, so Emily seconds. All right, so for the full board, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Anyone abstaining? If anyone did hand raising for any of those, please just note in the chat or send a message to Beth or myself and we will capture that for the minutes. But we are so thrilled, the ayes have it, that the State Advisory Council Board will endorse this statement, and we will update the language at the bottom of that statement before it goes out to our broader partners saying that this was endorsed by the State Advisory Council. So thank you all for your leadership in this arena and for moving forward together on this as we really figure out how we do this better as an early childhood system. Okay, so we're going to go on to the next section of our agenda, and I'm going to turn it over to Beth Trzanski, who's our Deputy Director, to talk about the performance measures for BBF, and we are thrilled about the evolution of this work as well.
Thank you, Morgan. I am really proud. I think I could cry. So thank you for everyone's support and for the work that is ahead. Whew. So I want to give an update. Speaking of things that matter, you know, we recognize that it's been BBF, as we identify ourselves as a collective impact organization and one that uses results-based accountability. One of the things that we've long been working on has been how we measure our impact, and we've shared with you several versions, but we're really at the end, at least of this this round, of how we measure impact. So with results-based accountability, many of you know that we measure how much, how well, and is anyone better off. And so I wanted to just share two of those sections, just to remind you of the things that I think that have most meaning in measuring is both the number of partners that are involved, but also the sectors. We're really working to identify, as we're talking about diversifying our membership. Membership and participation, that is one thing that we really value. And so this is one way to really hold ourselves accountable to trying to diversify who's sitting around the table, our tables, and the voices that we hear, as well as how we use data to inform our practices. And I was really thrilled to see that AAP has stood up a group working on health equity. So that is, it feels like there is some work happening in our state. Is anyone better off? So also measuring we have a scale, and I will share with you some of the questions that we're going to start conducting an annual survey of partners, including all of you and many others, to help us kind of track how BBF contributes to a more coordinated and integrated system of care. And then also to recognize evolving partnerships and connections made across agencies and partners. And that's something that as staff we will start to track. So I want to share, this is not what it will look like in its final version, but essentially the questions that will be on this partner survey, and wanted to let you have a chance to see this. So we are looking to survey our stakeholders and most importantly, the people who are sitting at all different levels of BBF tables, both regional and state level. We have a scale here under the question number 2, which is which of the following activities supported by BBF have contributed to your work with children and families? And so give you a chance to look at that. Everything from exchanging resources to bringing together diverse stakeholders. You know, that there may be regular meetings, but most importantly that they are meaningful. That by coming together, we're really reducing duplication, having shared decision making, etc. I'm going to move on to the second page. Question 3 is for people to reflect over the last year and how successful BBF has been in creating a more coordinated and integrated system. Question 4 is, how is your BBF counselor committee using data to inform your work? This is something we aspire to always do better. And then 2 open-ended questions for people to share bright spots in terms of what they see as working and what is something that BBF can improve upon. So I will pause there and see if there are any questions, but really, you know, behind the scenes, we've been working to finalize the survey and our performance measures, and we do intend to put this out. So you will see this in an online survey form early next month. And then we will continue to collect this information, some internally by staff monthly, and then the partner survey will be conducted annually. Any questions?
Beth, can I ask a quick question? I know you're gathering demographic data as well. Will you be able to kind of disaggregate that first question that you asked, like, have you participated in an SAC or a regional council or an ECAP committee? Will you be able to kind of disaggregate that data so you can kind of look at the different levels of participation and what kind of diversity is being represented at those tables?
Yes, I do hope that that data will help us inform our practice in that way.
And Renee,
okay, because I was just yeah, go ahead, Morgan. Sorry.
I was just going to say, so through this survey, we won't be able to capture that, the question that you were addressing right there, but internally our tracking documents will do that, right? So this is the survey that's going out to our partners to talk about participation, but we internally are going to be capturing who attended the meetings, what sectors, who are we missing, and that broader kind of demographic information, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, because I was just thinking that's going to help you in the future to really target, like, hey, we might have really diverse cross-sector participation at the SAC, but on a regional level, we're not seeing that same level of cross-pollination happening. So just to give you more of those finite details to figure out where to target that strategy. Thank you.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So this is Liz from Franklin Grand Isle. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to jump out and say from a regional coordinator voice, right along in this last year or so, I think that this work has taken place on multiple levels, but I felt like in this last year, this was like really like the first time that us as coordinators had tons of input and voice to what's going on here. And we feel, I'll speak for everyone, I'm comfortable doing that. I just feel like I feel some ownership over this work too, and just really feel like just along the way, like Beth and Morgan have done a really great job of connecting with us and making sure that this encompasses our whole organization. And with such amorphous work, that's really challenging to do. So just to put that out there too, just from coordinators, we're feeling really connected to that work too.
Thank you, Liz.
Great. So thank you for the input. And it has definitely been a team effort, in part because it has to be a team effort to collect accurate data. And so it will be a shift in terms of how we are collecting and reporting on both partners around the table, as well as really essentially the partnership building, the trust building, and how that shows up in our weekly and monthly meetings with each other.
Okay, so I know that we've already done quite a bit of work, but now I'm going to ask you for this really intense next 15 minutes to bear with us and do some really critical thinking as a board. So I know we don't do a lot of workshopping generally via Zoom. We generally have a state advisory council meeting and an ECAP meeting where we review our annual priorities and we talk about recommendations. And we have a very lengthy process at which we do that and develop the final language that gets put out in our annual publication, How Are Vermont's Young Children and Families. And so what I want to take the next 15 minutes to do is to review the recommendations, the priority areas, which for this past year were early childhood workforce and early childhood and family mental health. And talk with this group a little bit about the timing and process of recommendations, but how we should be thinking about these recommendations in the context of COVID, and to think about whether or not as a group we want to move our recommendations earlier in this process. So again, generally during our July SAC and ECAP summit, we have a very intense workshopping session where we talk through the recommendations that are generated by our early childhood action plan committees. And then later in the year, usually September, October, possibly even November, depending on the timing of How Are Vermont's Young Children, the State Advisory Council votes on those recommendations. And in this past year, we had adopted a faster paced strategy for some of this work, where we had said we were going to move our implementation cycle for the Early Childhood Action Plan and How Are Vermont's Young Children to come out in September. Given the COVID pandemic, we've determined that that is not the right strategy for this year, especially given the timing of budgeting and everything that's happening in the legislature, that we will still move forward with a January 1 presentation to the legislature. That being said, we recognize that this may be a very pivotal time for the State Advisory Council to come together and talk about potentially developing and refining a series of recommendations. So if you can go to the next slide for me, Beth, really quickly. I wanted to quickly provide this group with an outline of the top themes that we have heard at Building Bright Futures over the course of COVID. And Jessica, our legislative representative on this call, has seen me present some of this information in several different cases. But these are some of the things that we have heard from the early childhood field as key priorities and challenges across the board. So food security and basic needs, and these, I should say, are in no specific order. They are just there for you to be able to kind of review and think about how these 12 items may or may not fit within our 2 SAC priorities, okay? So health and safety, social emotional development and mental health, capacity and access for childcare, after school and summer programming, continuity of learning, capacity and access for healthcare and insurance, supplies, connectivity, supporting vulnerable populations. I didn't list them all there, but there we're talking about children with disabilities, special healthcare needs, those residing in families in poverty, English language learners. Number 10 is coordinating or having a coordinated early childhood response birth to age 12. Clear and consistent communication and guidance, and technological infrastructure needs. And so, one of the things I'd like, and Cheryl is going to help me with this, but as we're thinking about our 2 priority areas, what recommendations and strategies does this group feel have risen to the top of our work? And we can probably stop the screen share for a minute because I do want to have a deeper dive discussion now with the board.
And Morgan, can you say a little bit about how the statement on inclusion and social justice intersects with the discussion that we're having now?
Yeah, that's a great point, Julie. So, you know, one of the things that we, separate from what we thought we would be discussing today as a board in terms of our 2 priority areas for this past year, had workforce and mental health as 2 key priority areas. But it does feel like an opportune time to talk about additional priorities in the context of not just this statement, but also COVID, right? So how are we thinking about our work in these kind of bigger buckets of workforce and mental health? And how are we reviewing the past year recommendations and potential opportunities in this moment to make recommendations as a state advisory council?
Renee, do you want to expand on the comment that you just shared? It would be great to hear more about that.
Yeah, I can't type fast enough to keep up with my brain. So I'm just thinking, like, as opposed to, again, creating a standalone bucket of racial equity as important, I'm thinking the reverse. How do we embed work on racial equity within these 2 areas? So for example, the workforce, I think I might have mentioned this on last month's call, and I know I've talked with Morgan about it in terms of how are Vermont's young children, but what does our workforce look like in terms of racial diversity? And, you know, one of the things I pointed to, I know looking at Head Start data, we have a growing number of English language learners and children of color. And that pace of growth that we're seeing within the children is not reflected in the workforce. So while we have increasing numbers of children of color in classrooms, they're not necessarily seeing themselves within the teaching staff that are supporting them. So how might BBF advance and embed racial equity work into its priority area of workforce? And the same when we're going around mental health supports. We know that people of color are disproportionately impacted, both in terms of their health outcomes, access to services. So what can BBF do within our focus on access to early childhood family mental health that connects that racial equity piece and kind of addresses the current inequities? So not creating a whole new bubble, but again, thinking of ways that we can layer and embed this work into our current priorities.
I totally agree, Renee, with what you're saying. I even, as I was saying earlier about education of our providers as well, fits into that too. It's already a bucket to increase quality, but let's really think about it, you know, think about overlaying some of these, you know, racial equity across the buckets. But I also have a question as a somewhat new member. When you say, Morgan, our work in all of these areas, can you help me understand better? So who, say we pick, you know, 3 or 4 priorities, how does our work then impact who? Do you see my question? Are you telling childcare provider, you know, okay, so here's what we're working on and here are some suggestions we have? Are you telling state government? Are you telling our elected officials? What is the next step, I guess?
It's such a great question, Representative Brumsted. One of the things that we've been talking about in this past year after we made recommendations was making sure that when we make recommendations that they're going to and being directed towards the right groups and populations. So in my mind, as the leader of this State Advisory Council, it's really all of the above, right? We should be influencing policy change, but really promoting the work on the ground and at all of these different levels to make sure that we have this kind of aligned and coordinated effort on whatever the topic area is. So it's not just a recommendation to the legislature or to the governor. It's across the board. We as a state advisory council saying, this is what we value, these are our priorities, and we are really doing the work at all of these levels to influence change.
And so to give you, I guess I have a two-part question to that then. So to give information to everyone that helps them make better decisions within the environment that we sort of operate in. And so then if I were to go to a childcare center, whether or not it be in Chittenden County or Franklin County or wherever, would they know who Building Brighter Futures is and why it's important in the work that they do? What's your sense?
It's such a great question. And I think my answer would be, it depends how engaged they are in the broader systems level work and whether or not they have representatives sitting on any one of, whether it's our regional councils or the early childhood action plan committees, but that is the goal. So I would say, you know, when I came into this organization in terms of the leadership, my goal was to visit each of these regional councils and really build the brand of Building Bright Futures so that people understand that our work is to be this early childhood hub and that this is where they should go for information and questions and those larger policy-like discussions, as well as just to be included as a voice in our board. I don't think we're there yet. I think we have a ton of work to do in that arena in terms of communications across the board to different populations and how we as a board are engaging those groups, right? So, you know, as an example, when we think about a board and having a member from each of these different sectors, the hope is that you all are going back to your communities and using your networks to kind of infuse the information and the discussions and things we talk about here. But as a board, as an organization, I think we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that folks understand the role and the messaging and the infrastructure to really be that early childhood hub.
So I don't want to monopolize, but I want to be sure that I walk away today feeling more informed on this, because I agree that it's really important that we have a few things that we put to the top and say, these are really going to be our focus. And I get that. I just know, for example, I guess there are two things that I'm balancing in my head. One is that I know that Let's Grow Kids and their sort of network right now is saying to us as legislators, we're looking at 2025 as a really important year to sort of have gotten to a certain point. And so once that happens, to me, then that means Building Brighter Futures takes on a whole nother level of responsibility if they're not in the picture at that point, right? And then then that brings me to another question, which is in Chittenden County, many of you may have heard that we've lost both UVM, which had 60 families, and St. Michael's Child Care Centers, which had 40 families, not to mention hundreds of families on the waiting list. And so, and I know that Let's Grow Kids is working with St. Michael's. UVM has just put together a group, and so a lot of folks are working together with them. But I guess the question for me is, are we as a advisory council and as all the work that's going on, when UVM thinks, I don't think we can make it anymore, we're losing $500,000 every year. And when you talk about capacity and access, that's incredibly important as we think about COVID. And then, okay, so how has COVID impacted our ability to have access for families that want to go back to work? So UVM sees that, or any big child care center sees it and says, I need to call Building Brighter Futures today because I want to see how the community network can help us to think through the issues that we're throwing at the community. So I guess I just wonder, is that how we all see our role at some level?
It's such a great point. And one of the things I will say, and Allie is on the call as well, and I believe Lori Myers was on the call a little bit earlier if she's not already, but that is actually exactly how we see our work. We actually have connected with folks at UVM, not to support their advocacy on this topic, but to support them in thinking about what it means for communities, what does it mean for partners, what does it mean for the teachers, and how do we as a field think about the impact of some closures. And to go back to the the other point about LGK and the timeline and Building Bright Futures and what that means in terms of our integrated approach to the system, Building Bright Futures is absolutely a part of that longer term sustainability plan. And Allie, jump in at any point in terms of thinking about the kind of future of Let's Grow Kids. But I also think it's important for the board and the broader community partners to know that LGK has this incredible approach to laser vision on childcare and has this beautiful vision and approach to supporting that arena of the work. And Building Bright Futures is also this broader early childhood context and how we think about this integration of both the child, the family, and the broader system of services. And so when I talk with folks about the distinction between LGK and BBF, I really talk about the fact that LGK is focused on childcare, high quality, affordable childcare by 2025. Whereas Building Bright Futures is talking about integration for the entire early childhood system of services. It's childcare, it's health, it's social emotional development, it's children's integrated services. It's, it's this constellation of really complicated partners and serving as that foundation. So Allie, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I do agree with so much of that. I think that the idea is we've always been very, very clear. We know we're just focused on one slice of the pie, and we want to continue to be very clear about that. But we're putting our thumb on the scale for high quality, affordable childcare because no one's put their thumb on the scale before. It's a missing piece of the puzzle, and it's a huge piece of the puzzle, and it's a very important. We'll have all these wonderful ramifications for so many things, when we get it right in Vermont as we're marching towards it together. So we're really clear on that. That's why we have a deadline. That's why we're able to say we're going to go in and then go out. The public funding is the key. So that's why we can justify going out. If we get the public funding, that's so much of the missing link on this piece. Then there's so much other really intricate work of, as Morgan's saying, integrating that into all this other across the spectrum of services for kids and families 0 to 5, well beyond the child care setting. And so we try to make sure we're really well coordinated as, so that we're not missing something. So those are connected, but I just do see them as very different. Like, as Morgan said, we're really just so focused on this one thing and have the whole sort of apparatus moving towards that. But I also would just say, to put a fine point on what I'm hearing from this conversation from a BBF perspective is, BBF should maybe be seen as having a little bit more power than some people see it as having, because ultimately it's in statute as a public-private partnership and is allowed to make policy recommendations. And perhaps we do not flex that muscle enough as an organization. And I understand why. It's complicated. We have public and private folks at the table. That is in itself a difficult proposition. You can't be advocates, but you can make policy recommendations. So what does that mean? I hear sort of Morgan saying to us, what does that mean functionally? Can we do something else here maybe? Maybe we say, look, for example, I testify really specifically from Let's Grow Kids and say, this is what we hear the childcare world needs from COVID dollars. Morgan testifies, and she doesn't necessarily, I can sense, feel like she has the permission to say, I'm going to make policy recommendations in my testimony from BBF's perspective. She raises up voices, but she doesn't make recommendations specifically. So we might be able to, as a board, enable a couple more specifics on the policy recommendations in the moment, and that might actually make BBF be seen with a lot more force for a lot more people.
I agree, Allie. I think that that's going to become more and more important. And so in today's discussion, what you want us talking about, that I took us a little bit off here, is what do we think is priority? And honestly, capacity and access is going to be incredibly important to pay attention to it, to collect data about it as we transition back to a vaccine world, and from now until we get there. I think that's a huge issue for all of us, and legislators are worried about it, and we're not exactly sure how to move forward. So we're going to need people like this group to help us.
Can I jump in for a second? Sorry, Cheryl, I know you were about to say something. I always like to, just as a parent, put on my parent hat here, even though I've been in this world for a couple of years now, and just say that in these moments, there's such an opportunity to take a perspective shift and think, what is it that our families need? What is it that our families are defining that they need? And it actually, when I looked at that list, I was curious about which recommendations were coming kind of up communication channels from families, which were coming from providers. And I think when we look at that system and we look at how the system communicates between all of the stakeholders, I think it's just really important to highlight that we get kind of equal perspectives from all of those areas so that we don't have this sort of prescriptive, this is what people are saying they need, but rather we have that reflection of, elevating those needs as they arise. And they're going to be different depending on the regions in Vermont. We just have a very diverse population distribution. And so I just, I love to throw that in and just catch, I think we can catch ourselves in our groupthink sometimes.
Thank you, Emily. Cheryl, did you want to?
So, yeah, Emily, you're a very good facial reader, even in these little squares. I feel like one of the phrases I heard a long time ago is people vote with their feet about being in meetings. And I feel like we're over time and we're all still here. So it's a pretty big vote with our feet or our Zoom boxes. So I'm just wondering how we make sure we hold and elevate what we've discussed and move it forward to the next step. And I know we'll have executive committee in between, and so that might be a place that we can take some of this up, but wondered, Morgan and Beth, what advice you would have.
So I've loved this discussion. I think it's incredibly important. And even though we didn't talk about what specific priorities outside of a couple from Representative Brumsted, it's really important for the board to be able to weigh in and have a discussion on not only the priorities, but the process and what our role is in the system of services and where we can lean in a little bit harder. So I really appreciated some of those comments. And I will say that as I am, and Beth is sometimes the face of the organization in terms of providing testimony, the way we have approached it in the past has been to say, okay, we're elevating voices, we do information gathering, and then instead of saying, here are the recommendations of either BBF or the board, we couch them in broader policy considerations. So we'll say, these are all of the things that you should be considering as you're making a decision about X, Y, or Z. The most concrete example is childcare. And the most concrete questions I receive as the ED is, how much does it cost? So if you're saying these are all the things we should be considering, how much does it cost? So I think what I would love to do as we move forward in the next month or so is talk with our executive team, but also bring back to this board a series of things that I'd like you to consider giving BBF more formal leadership and power to do, both within testimony, but also as we're moving forward and making policy decisions. And just also thinking about the process by which we make decisions and put forth recommendations as a group. And thinking a little bit about not only having recommendations come out on an annual basis. So right now, the formal recommendations come out in Howard Vermont's Young Children. And thinking about our timeline and our process by which we can have recommendations come out at other times during the year and then be integrated into that Howard Vermont's Young Children and Families document. So Beth, if you want to weigh in there as well, I'm just wondering if that's a good approach to this next conversation.
I don't have anything to add. I think I suppose what I can add is that we see the value in being nimble, right? And to be able to make change. And so this is a growth moment, I think, for this council, is to recognize that there have been some missed opportunities, and we want to do better for our kids by figuring out how we can be nimble and maintain our kind of collective impact, collective power together.
And I do just want to remind all of us that the world has so dramatically changed from the time that we created all those priorities and had that beautiful process in place so that things could bubble up from the regions, et cetera. I thought Jessica's comment about capacity and accessibility, you know, that was our priority a couple years ago, and it's just back with a vengeance. And so to be nimble to respond to that may mean almost disregarding, although, you know, that's a hard thing to say, but almost disregarding that careful process that we've been through in order to embrace the needs of the present. And the same on the inclusion and racial justice front. It's a different world, and we need to respond as best we can.
I totally agree, Julie. I think that is, you know, I'm even hearing from a lot of families that are saying, we wish that you all would help us more with balancing whether or not there's a chance for one parent to stay home. A lot of moms have come to me and said, I always thought that I had to work to prove who I am as well as to be a great mom. And now with COVID, I'm just feeling, and being home these 3 months, I'm starting to feel like, is there a way for us to do it better on a smaller scale, you know? And so that's like a whole new, whoa, okay, we got to relook at some of that. And I know that we've tried to help some of our essential workers when we couldn't find good, you know, a childcare slot that in their area, was bringing in a childcare person into the home to help take care of fewer children. And there's more to that. I mean, I just think this is it, like we said, we're getting over our time, but a whole brainstorming effort even on that is, are there more families that are interested in trying to figure that out? Or even the extended family, you know, I've also heard from families who want to buy a bigger house so they can have their parents be there to help them so that they're not in this situation again, where they've got someone to help support them if we, you know, because we're all a little afraid right now about what does the future hold. So I just think this group could be incredibly helpful with qualitative and quantitative data that always helps to truly inform a discussion. It's not the whole discussion, but it's a very important piece of that. It's so easy for legislators to talk like I'm doing right now in anecdote, you know, just like, oh, here's an example, here's an example. But what does that really mean? And how many of those are there? Maybe I talked to 3 and that seems like a lot to me. Maybe it's not, maybe it's 15 across the state, and that's not very many, right? So, you know.
So before we close, I do want to say 2 more things, because I think it's important for this board to hear and to remember. So we often talk about building bright futures as neutral. And what I want to remind the board of is that we are only neutral in our convening. Right? We as a board bring folks together at every single levels of our infrastructure to convene people. And the neutrality comes in because we're engaging as many different voices as we possibly can at every single table to make sure that we have a collective impact approach to this work. But we don't actually provide neutral recommendations for the most part. As a board, we make recommendations and we take a stance on many different topic areas. So I just wanted to put that out as a reminder to the group that when I think about this group as a neutral convener, I only see the word neutral in the convening part of our work as a group together, and that we should be striving to make sure at every level we have the right voices at the table to come together to make concrete recommendations. And then the second thing I will say is that in the next month or in the next 2 months, as we're working towards recommendations, as we're working towards an upcoming joint session with early childhood action plan committees and the SAC, Beth and I will take and I volunteered you for this, Beth, sorry. We'll take a look at the Building Bright Futures bylaws. We've already been reviewing Act 104 and the Head Start Act to make sure that as we're thinking about revising process and authorities within the SAC, that we are within our bounds, but we also think it's a time to review our bylaws and make some upgrades. So we'll bring that back to the board in this next iteration as well. Cheryl, did you want to weigh in anywhere there? Okay.
No, all good. This was great discussion.
Okay. Well, thank you folks so much for bearing with us. Chloe, did you want to end?
She had to hop off.
Oh, sorry.
So with that, yes. Do we need a motion to adjourn?
That would be
I'll
great.
make a motion.
I'll second.
All
Amy
right.
Johnson.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Your
Thanks,
week.
everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Morgan, I hope I didn't talk too much.
No, it's a perfect opportunity for us to have these conversations, Jessica. I really appreciate it. And it's